In today's video, we explore 5 YouTubers who were mauled on camera by wild animals. From a Nile crocodile ambush in Uganda's reed-choked shallows to a wild boar goring deep in Romania's forests. But first, we begin with a solo survivalist crouched near a cold Alaskan riverbank, unaware that something massive and silent was already closing in. It was September 18, 2015, and the air along the creek banks of Katmai National Park held the sharp edge of early cold. The river, swollen from recent rain, ran fast and brown, weaving through a vast sprawl of gravel bars where death waited patiently in the shadows. Jason Firth was a 29-year-old former Army mechanic from Twin Falls, Idaho, who had built a modest YouTube following with solo survival videos. His channel averaged a few thousand views per upload, mostly from hobbyists and preppers drawn to his calm, gravel-voiced narration and deliberate editing style. Unlike the flashy adventure influencers who dominated the platform, Jason focused on what he called real conditions: cold weather shelters, minimal gear, off-trail travel through some of America's most unforgiving wilderness. This trip to Katmai was meant to be his most ambitious project yet. A week-long solo trek through the backcountry with no tent, just a tarp and a bear canister. He flew in by bush plane 3 days earlier, logging his route with rangers who warned him of heightened brown bear activity during peak pre-winter feeding. Coastal brown bears can weigh over 1,000 pounds and possess strength 20 times that of an adult human. Their massive claws, up to 6 inches long, are designed to tear through flesh and bone with devastating efficiency. Their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a human skull like an eggshell. These aren't just impressive statistics, they represent millions of years of evolutionary perfection in the art of killing. Jason's final day of footage was shot near a narrow creek off the Savanoski River. He appeared calm, whispering into his microphone about respecting the distance between predator and man. He pointed to an alder thicket across the creek, explaining how bears use such cover for concealment. Behind him, the water moved fast and shallow, its constant murmur masking the approach of the beast. He remained crouched near the bank, facing downstream, completely unaware of the massive predator approaching from behind. There was no warning growl, no prolonged stalking behavior, just the sudden rush of a 900-pound coastal brown bear bursting from the alders less than 30 feet away. Jason spun toward the sound, startled, shouting once as he scrambled to his feet and stumbled backward. The uneven gravel betrayed him, and he fell. In that moment of vulnerability, his fate was sealed. The bear closed the distance with shocking speed, covering the ground between them in seconds. Jason kicked desperately as the massive predator reared up, but his efforts were futile against such overwhelming power. The first swipe of the bear's paw sent him sprawling onto his side, dust and moss lifting from the disturbed ground. The bear pinned Jason with its massive forelimbs and began the methodical process of killing. Its first bite pierced deep through his left shoulder and collarbone, crushing bone and severing arteries. Another bite clamped along the base of his jaw, the bear's teeth penetrating skull and brain tissue. Jason's left hand reached desperately toward the bear spray canister on his hip, but it was never deployed. The animal shook him once before biting again. The sounds captured on the recording were brief but haunting. Heavy breathing, broken gasps, the sharp crack of ribs, and the scrape of gravel under shifting weight. The attack lasted under 30 seconds, but those moments contained a lifetime of terror and pain. When it was over, the bear simply left Jason's mangled body and disappeared back into the brush from which it had emerged. Blood soaked into the gravel as his GoPro continued recording for another 4 hours, powered by an external battery pack, documenting nothing but the growing stillness of death. When Jason missed his scheduled satellite check-in 2 nights later, rangers launched a ground search. They located his camp upstream, a tarp shelter partially collapsed, food properly sealed in an untouched bear canister, GPS unit lying atop a waterproof map. Following trail markers from his notepad, they discovered the tripod the next morning, still upright like a monument to his final moments. His body was found nearby, partially buried in disturbed soil and leaf litter. Evidence suggested the bear had briefly returned after the initial attack, possibly to cache the remains, a natural behavior that transforms human tragedy into mere biological function. Officials determined the encounter was defensive, a close-range surprise meeting likely triggered by Jason unknowingly positioning himself near a bear trail or feeding zone. No baiting, food rescue, or improper storage were discovered. Jason had followed all the protocols, respected all the warnings, and still died. The bear was neither tracked nor euthanized. It had simply acted according to its nature, defending territory or responding to perceived threats with the lethal efficiency that had kept its species alive for millennia. Jason's remains were flown out under ranger escort, transferred through Anchorage to Boise, and finally home to Twin Falls. His parents handled arrangements quietly. The funeral attended by family, 3 fellow veterans, and a handful of subscribers who had followed his journey from the beginning. National Park authorities confiscated Jason's camera and hard drive shortly after recovery, citing the need to prevent the footage from being leaked or misused online. Officials later confirmed the video would remain sealed out of respect for the family and to avoid fueling sensationalism around a predatory event that was, by all evidence, a tragic accident rooted in proximity and instinct. Just like the silence that preceded blood in the gravel bars of Alaska, the still waters of Lake Victoria gave no warning until a ripple broke behind the lens and a crocodile surged from below. It was February 14, 2017, and the late afternoon sun sat low over Lake Victoria, turning the bay's surface to gold. Reed beds lined the shoreline, masking the presence of one of Africa's most efficient killers lurking just beneath the surface. Dylan Morales was a 25-year-old backpacker from Costa Rica who had been traveling across East Africa for 2 months, filming low-budget nature vlogs for his growing YouTube channel. His subscriber count hovered around 2,200, but he had cultivated a reputation for placing himself in remote environments with minimal preparation. His videos featured a loose, unpolished style that viewers found authentic. 1-minute intros, handheld walkthroughs, and long takes of him interacting with nature in unscripted, often reckless ways. Dylan's stated goal was to film what real wilderness feels like up close, but he had no formal background in biology or regional ecology. He trusted instinct and improvisation over expertise, a philosophy that would prove fatal in the predator-rich waters of Lake Victoria. What Dylan likely didn't understand was the ancient killing machine that ruled these waters. Nile crocodiles are deadly ambush predators, growing over 16 feet long and delivering bone-crushing bites over 3,000 psi before drowning their prey. Once they clamp onto prey, they employ the death roll, rapid spinning designed to disorient, dismember, and drown victims in seconds. That morning, Dylan had arrived in a fishing village near Entebbe and spent time talking with local children and fishermen. An older man gutting tilapia near his canoe had warned Dylan explicitly not to swim in the bay. He pointed toward the reeds and explained that crocodiles move through the area regularly, taking goats and sometimes children. Dylan laughed and waved off the concern, brushing it off with a casual, "It's just a rinse. Nothing's gonna grab me in waist-deep water." By 5 p.m., the light was soft enough for filming. Dylan positioned his camera just beyond the high water mark, preparing to shoot what he described as a bathing sequence inspired by local villagers. Shirtless and barefoot, he carried a bar of soap in a small bucket, intending to demonstrate how people washed in the lake. Unlike villagers, who typically stayed near the reeds or used enclosures, he stepped out farther alone for a better camera angle. 3 village boys watched from shore as he waded deeper into the murky water. The shallow edge of Lake Victoria slopes gently into dark, weed-choked depths where visibility drops to 0 beyond a few feet. This environment provides perfect hunting conditions for Nile crocodiles, allowing them to approach prey completely undetected. Dylan moved slowly through the water, adjusting his stance as he splashed his face for the camera. He kept glancing back at his tripod, gesturing with his left hand while narrating softly in his mixture of Spanish and broken English. The water around him appeared calm and harmless, giving no indication of the massive predator that had been tracking his movements since he first entered the lake. This was likely a mature male exceeding 12 feet, a size capable of attacking large mammals and even overturning dugout canoes. Then Dylan screamed. The sound was sharp and brief, a single high-pitched cry that transformed into a grunt as he was suddenly pulled backward and down. Water surged violently around him as a long tail and part of a broad back surfaced for less than a second before disappearing again. The crocodile clamped onto Dylan's right side just under the ribs, its massive jaws penetrating deep into his torso. The initial bite alone would have caused catastrophic internal damage, crushing ribs and puncturing vital organs. Dylan twisted once in the water, his body responding instinctively to the unimaginable pain, before the crocodile began its death roll. This spinning technique, perfected over millions of years of evolution, serves multiple purposes. It disorients prey, tears flesh from bone, and ensures drowning by keeping victims underwater. Dylan's arm reached above the surface briefly during the violent rotation, but he didn't scream again. The crocodile rolled with him in a wide arc before both predator and prey vanished beneath the surface. The camera, still recording from shore, captured the panicked voices rising as witnesses realized what was happening. One man waded in waist deep but saw nothing in the murky water. Another shouted to check farther down the reeds, but within a minute, an eerie silence had returned to the bay. Authorities called by the natives arrived at dusk to find Dylan's tripod and backpack abandoned on shore, his camera still powered on and recording. A review of the footage confirmed that the attack had occurred within seconds of Dylan turning toward shore, with no prior warning signs visible, no ripples, no fin, no surface breach. Just flat water, then sudden explosive violence. Dylan's body was found the next morning in papyrus reeds, legs missing from mid-thigh and his torso showing signs of massive trauma. Punctured ribs, crushed tissue, and deep tearing consistent with a crocodile's jaws. Remarkably, his face remained intact, preserving his identity for the grim task of repatriation. Local police marked the case an accidental death and filed a brief incident summary. Officials posted a handwritten sign near the bay warning of crocodile danger, but no patrols or removals followed. In this region, such attacks were uncommon but not unusual. The predator had acted on instinct and life moved on. Dylan's family in San Jose held a private funeral, requesting that footage of the attack not be circulated. His YouTube channel fell silent, a digital monument to the dangers of treating nature as entertainment rather than respecting it as the domain of perfectly evolved killers. No camera angle can prepare you for what rises silently from murky water, or crashes headlong through firelight in the dead of night. In Romania, one man's minimalist shelter offered no protection from the massive boar already circling his camp. It was November 4th, 2016, and a thin crust of snow covered the valley floor in Romania's southern Carpathians, where ancient forests concealed predators that had terrorized humans for millennia. Cold wind moved through bare beech branches, stirring dry leaves and waves along the ground, while something massive moved beyond the firelight. Ian Campbell was a 34-year-old Canadian with a forestry degree who had worked trail maintenance jobs in British Columbia before launching a modest YouTube channel focused on primitive shelter building and cold weather survival. His content was slow-paced and instructional, attracting just under 4,000 subscribers, mostly hobbyists and DIY enthusiasts drawn to his calm, thorough approach to wilderness skills. This trip to Romania was meant to elevate his channel to the next level. Ian had chosen the Carpathian wilderness for its thick forest cover, large carnivore populations, and lack of foot traffic in late fall. He packed light to stay mobile and true to his channel's minimalist ethos, with only a tarp, hatchet, camera equipment, and basic food supplies. Notably, he carried no firearm or deterrent, a deliberate choice to showcase survival without modern defenses, even in terrain known to harbor large predators. By his third day in the wilderness, light snow had begun to fall as Ian established camp in the shelter valley rimmed with pine and hornbeam. He constructed a lean-to against a fallen trunk, dug a shallow fire pit, and collected dead wood from higher ground. Around sunset, he filmed a segment near his fire, speaking softly about the animal scat he had discovered throughout the day before signing off. His camera remained mounted on a motion time-lapse rig, pointed at the shelter throughout the night. At 2:07 a.m., the first rustling sounds began just beyond the fire circle. The audio captured Ian's voice, abrupt and commanding, telling something to get away. The movement quickened as a thick-bodied shape entered the frame from the left, a massive wild boar, its outline bulky and menacing in the flickering firelight. This was likely an old solitary male, driven from a sounder during the November rutting season when competition for mates makes boars particularly aggressive and unpredictable. These dominant individuals often exceed 440 pounds and are known to travel alone, highly territorial and prone to confrontation. They can possess powerful necks and razor-sharp tusks up to 8 inches long. These massive omnivores have poor night vision, making them easily startled and prone to violent defensive attacks when they feel cornered or threatened. Ian sat up in his sleeping bag, grabbing a thick stick from behind the shelter as the boar advanced with jerky, agitated movements. The animal snorted and stamped, displaying the classic warning signs of an imminent attack that Ian either didn't recognize or couldn't properly respond to in his vulnerable position. He shouted again, louder this time, and struggled to stand while still partially trapped in his sleeping bag. The boar charged, covering the distance between them in seconds. Its razor-sharp tusks caught Ian mid-thigh, the impact lifting him slightly before knocking him backward to the ground. The initial gore likely severed his femoral artery, causing massive blood loss that would prove fatal within minutes. Ian hit the frozen earth hard, screaming once in pain before attempting to crawl away from his attacker. The enraged boar spun and attacked again, this time driving its snout and tusks into Ian's lower torso with bone-crushing force. The camera footage blurred as the tripod was knocked sideways during the violent struggle, but the audio continued recording the sounds of Ian's agony. His screams were short and broken, punctuated by groaning as the massive animal continued its assault. Wild boars kill by goring, trampling, and rapid blood loss. Their tusks inflict deep wounds while their weight can crush bones and organs. Ian's last audible sound came at 2:09 a.m., a sharp intake of breath that stopped suddenly as death claimed him. The entire attack had lasted less than 2 minutes. His body was discovered 2 days later by a volunteer ground team conducting a grid search along a stream bed below a ridge. They spotted the torn remains of his sleeping bag first, then followed a short trail of blood and churned leaves to where his body lay. Forest rangers followed tracks from the campsite through a nearby thicket and located the responsible boar feeding on the remains of a previously killed deer. The animal showed no fear when approached, displaying the aggressive confidence of a dominant predator. After confirmation of its involvement in Ian's death, the approximately 500-pound boar was shot and removed from the area. Scarring on its shoulders indicated a history of violent encounters with other males during territorial disputes. Romanian authorities handled the incident quietly, sending only a brief notice to the Canadian embassy in Bucharest. His remains were cremated and returned to Vancouver, where friends and family remembered him as a passionate outdoorsman who had simply encountered nature's darker reality. At his family's request, his YouTube channel was taken down weeks later, leaving only archived clips scattered across forums. The lean-to he built stood for months afterward, a fading reminder that in nature's domain, humans remain vulnerable to the predators that still rule the wild. The cold forest of Europe had offered no mercy, but in the warm, murky waters off Molokai, an even older predator was already rising from below. It was August 2nd, 2018. And the sea off Molokai South Shore churned with the remnants of a tropical system that had pushed sediment into the shallows, creating perfect conditions for one of the ocean's most efficient predators. The water ran cloudy in streaks of green and brown, reducing visibility to mere feet as something massive moved beyond the reef shelf. Evan Nishida was a 27-year-old part-time barista from Hilo who had a small YouTube following with his gear review and spearfishing channel. His content focused on affordability, highlighting entry-level equipment for recreational fishers and young freedivers just starting out. Evan never claimed to be an expert. He had grown up near water but mostly dove close to shore in familiar jetties and tide channels. This trip to Molokai was meant to mark a new phase in his channel's development. He had recently received a sponsorship box from a budget spear manufacturer and wanted to field test the new pole spear on video. His plan was to shoot a solo diving segment while his two friends remained on shore to handle drone footage and provide safety spotting from the rocks. That morning, several locals had commented on the dangerous visibility conditions. Rain from the previous day's storm had stirred up the seabed, creating the murky water that tiger sharks exploit for hunting. Tiger sharks grow up to 16 feet and 1,400 pounds. Their massive jaws contain rows of serrated teeth specifically designed for tearing flesh and bone. Unlike smaller reef sharks, tiger sharks are opportunistic hunters that actively patrol shallow waters, especially during periods of poor visibility when their prey cannot detect their approach. A lifeguard had warned Evan directly to stay high in the water column if he planned to film, explaining that sharks become more aggressive when they cannot see clearly. Evan nodded but made no adjustment. He later told a friend through a call that he thought the lifeguard was being overly cautious, and that staying near the reef would give him the lighting and close-up shots he needed. With a new gear sponsor expecting footage that week, he felt pressure to deliver something dramatic, even if it meant ignoring the advice. He entered the water just after 10:15 a.m., wearing a GoPro chest mount and carrying only a short fiberglass pole spear, a primitive tool better suited for small reef fish than fending off large predators. The reef shelf where he began diving was relatively shallow at less than 8 feet. But it dropped off sharply around 40 yards from shore into the deeper hunting grounds where tiger sharks patrol for prey. Evan filmed several test shots and narrated a segment about spear tip attachments, his tone casual and focused as he drifted over darker patches of reef. At 10:24 a.m., a lifeguard sitting 100 yards away spotted a large, dark shape moving through the water. Using binoculars to watch the shelf's edge, he noticed a single splash followed by a fast-moving form cutting just beneath the surface, heading directly toward Evan's position with predatory intent. The recovered GoPro footage captured the exact moment of the attack with horrifying clarity. The tiger shark emerged from the lower right side of the frame, fast, silent, and massive. Evan turned at the last second, his arm shifting to raise his spear in a futile defensive gesture. The shark clamped its jaws around Evan's right flank and stomach with bone-crushing force. The initial bite alone would have caused catastrophic internal damage, severing arteries and crushing organs. Evan's scream was cut short as the massive predator wrenched him violently through the water, blood exploding across the camera lens as the shark performed a brief death roll before releasing its grip. Evan surfaced once, gasping desperately for air. He attempted to swim toward the reef's edge, but his movements were already weakening from massive blood loss and trauma. The shark, following its predatory instincts, returned almost immediately for a second attack. Tiger sharks rarely abandon prey once an attack begins, and in murky water their aggression intensifies. The scent of blood triggers a feeding response that overrides caution, driving them to pursue wounded targets relentlessly. The second strike was captured as the GoPro was knocked downward, showing Evan's chest now covered in blood while his swim kicks became increasingly erratic and weak. The camera recorded a final moment of bubbling water and muffled cries before falling silent at 10:26 a.m., documenting the end of a life in less than 2 minutes of savage violence. The lifeguard reached the scene 2 minutes later, but it was far too late. Evan's body floated face down near the drop-off, his right arm missing below the elbow and his torso showing massive trauma, including evisceration and deep tissue loss, consistent with sustained feeding behavior. Paramedics were called by the lifeguard. Arriving 10 minutes later, they performed triage on the sand but declared him dead at 10:38 a.m. The Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources confirmed the bite pattern as consistent with a subadult tiger shark, likely measuring 10 to 12 feet in length. No culling efforts or increased patrols followed the attack, as officials recognized it as unprovoked predatory behavior during normal feeding patterns. Evan's funeral was held 6 days later in Hilo, attended by extended family, co-workers, and a small group of local divers who had followed his videos. At his parents' request, the YouTube channel was taken down within a week, with a brief statement posted thanking viewers and urging caution for others who venture into wild waters. As clouded water claimed Evan off Molokai, a crouched frame and camera lens would invite the same fate in Limpopo, half a world away, under a different sky, but with the same fatal mistake. It was June 25, 2014, and the gravel roads near the northern boundary of a private reserve in Limpopo lay dry and silent. Sparse acacia thorns cast long, jagged shadows across the roadside scrub, while something big and lethal watched from the dense thorn belt beyond. Martin Dupont was a 31-year-old French expatriate with a low-profile wildlife content channel known mostly among ecotourism followers and travel vloggers. He had volunteered in South Africa during his 20s, working at a rehabilitation camp near Kruger, an experience that had given him a loose network of local contacts and a dangerously romantic notion of African wilderness. By 2014, he had returned with borrowed gear and about 5,100 subscribers, chasing viral fame through increasingly reckless encounters with apex predators. Martin's videos feature dramatic titles like tracking a lone after dark and sleeping next to a lion, but his actual footage was quiet and meandering, lacking the professional polish that might have justified the risks he took. He was pursuing an idea more than a coherent format. Raw personal proximity to animals that could kill him without effort or remorse. This trip to Limpopo wasn't sanctioned by any legitimate wildlife organization. Martin had paid a local game drive operator off the books to bring him to a seldom-used road outside a reserve where lions were known to cross during the colder months. His goal was to capture himself at eye level with a lion in soft focus, believing that just one 30-second viral clip could transform his modest channel into internet stardom. The operator, a Sangha man in his 50s who had worked in game areas for years, had warned Martin repeatedly about the dangers. He emphasized the importance of staying in the vehicle, avoiding the grass line, and never crouching near brush where predators could approach undetected. Martin nodded at each warning, but evidently dismissed the concerns. In one of his videos, he claimed that lions were shy creatures that wouldn't attack unless provoked. At 10:42 a.m., Martin stepped out of the idling vehicle and placed his tripod 10 feet ahead, aiming the lens toward a low ridge of elephant grass. His plan was to frame himself against the open bush, creating the intimate wildlife footage that he believed would make him famous. The recovered footage showed him moving back and forth between camera and vehicle, adjusting focus and testing distances while wearing a faded khaki shirt and soft boots that muffled his steps. His confidence in his ability to read animal behavior and maintain safe distances would prove to be a deadly miscalculation. A lioness had already been watching from the elephant grass, employing the patient stalking behavior that made her species successful for millions of years. Lions use stealth and camouflage to deadly effect, remaining unseen in tall grass until the moment they strike, covering distances up to 50 feet in mere seconds. Females weigh up to 300 pounds and possess the strength to bring down prey many times their size. Martin crouched at his tripod height to align a shot, unknowingly triggering the lioness's predatory instincts. In the wild, crouching behavior often signals vulnerability or injury, making it an irresistible trigger for hunting cats. His low posture and focused attention on his camera equipment left him completely unaware of the massive predator positioning herself for a killing strike. The lioness charged from less than 30 feet away, covering the distance in seconds. Martin never had time to turn around or react to the approaching threat. The massive predator struck him across the back with both front paws, her claws extended and her full weight behind the impact. The blow knocked Martin face down onto the gravel with bone-crushing force, stunning him and making any escape attempt impossible. The lioness immediately clamped her powerful jaws around the side of his neck and shoulder, her 4-inch canine teeth penetrating deep into vital structures. The lioness then dragged Martin's body several meters into the brush, following the instinctive behavior that helps lions protect their kills from scavengers. The entire attack lasted less than 40 seconds. The operator, unarmed and alone, could only radio for help and drive away at speed to find assistance. By the time rangers arrived 20 minutes later, the lioness had vanished back into the reserve, leaving behind Martin's mangled corpse partially hidden under brush. His throat had been torn open by the lioness's powerful jaws, while deep punctures marked his shoulder and upper back where her teeth had penetrated. Dragging abrasions on his legs showed how she had moved him into concealment. Forensic examination confirmed death within seconds due to catastrophic cervical trauma. The lioness was identified by her tracks but left undisturbed, as she had remained within the unfenced reserve perimeter and shown no evidence of repeated predatory behavior toward humans. Officials classified the incident as a clear result of human error. Martin's body was flown back to France within the week, and his funeral was held in a small chapel outside Lyon, attended by family, a few former co-workers, and 2 wildlife colleagues from his early volunteer days. At his family's request, his YouTube channel was quietly deactivated to prevent the footage from becoming exploitative or misused. Thanks for watching. If these stories gripped you, get ready. The next video is just as intense and maybe even harder to believe. See you soon.